There is no doubt we've got a changing media landscape, and that is why so many of you that are watching Unmuted are watching a podcast instead of sitting down and watching TV. What is so interesting to me, and I want to share all this information with our guest, Catherine Herridge, and we are delighted that you are here. You are someone that is truly a media expert and an Emmy award-winning journalist, which many people now are not journalists. They're opinionators, as I say, but you are what is a true investigative journalist. But one of the things we found is 90 million Americans a week are watching podcasts. And that is a very different way of gathering their news. 250 million people are using X every day, and 74% of those X users are getting their political news on X. So, people are consuming their media differently, and they're gathering their news differently. They kind of build their own network, if you will. And I would love to hear from you what your thoughts are on these streaming platforms and on platforms like X and podcast, and how you see that affecting the work you do as a journalist.
I think we're in the middle, Senator, of a revolution in the media landscape. This is an inflection point. There's a loss of trust in corporate media, and this is now intersecting with these huge advances in the technology. 10 years ago, if you didn't trust what you watched, you didn't like what you watched, you didn't have a lot of choices. But now the technology has created this off-ramp to platforms like X, like YouTube, like Instagram. So people are taking their sort of thoughts and their feelings of sort of a lack of trust, and they're exiting the marketplace. And that's why we're seeing this collapse with the numbers with corporate media. And I think this will only accelerate in the next year or two.
What do you think of how Elon Musk took over Twitter and it became X, and the way they have approached the things they have allowed, and just the changes that are there?
So after I got fired at CBS News, which is what happened for committing journalism, I might add, I made a choice to go independent. And we started doing investigations, very similar to what I was doing at Fox and CBS, but with difficult topics. And the first one was on COVID vaccine injury in the U.S. military. And X was the only platform where we felt that we could drop an investigation and not fear censorship.
How interesting that is, because we had such, one of the things the military members were so aggressive in reporting those injuries, finding people that would report them. So how interesting that X was the only place you could drop the investigation.
Yeah, X was really the only one. We were very concerned that if it went on to YouTube, for example, that it would be sort of de-amplified and we wouldn't reach the audience that we intended. On X, I think we had over 4 million engagements on that investigation. And the soldier who had a debilitating heart condition linked to the mRNA vaccine eventually got 2 years of back pay because she had been thrown off orders because of her health conditions. So we felt that we could do it in an environment that wasn't censored. But then I think more significantly, Senator, we saw the government take action. We saw the Department of the Army respond to our reporting on X, and I think actually in an accelerated manner, faster than even if I had been at CBS News.
And you've also got a judge that's holding you in civil contempt because you would not reveal a source.
That's right.
And he wants to fine you $800 a day.
That's correct.
For not giving up a source. Talk to me about that a little bit.
I can't say a lot about the case because it's still in litigation. It's before the appellate court here in Washington, D.C., but I was found in contempt of court for refusing to disclose confidential sources for a series of stories, national security stories I did at Fox News. What concerns me most, Senator, is that we're in this new marketplace of smaller independent newsrooms and independent journalists. And unless we really have protections for these journalists, like the Press Act, for example, they will be lawfared out of existence. The only reason I'm able to take this really principled stand, in part, is because I have the backing of my former employer, because the legal costs, the emotional costs of taking on a case like this, a lot of journalists are not going to be able to withstand that. And my concern is that these diverse voices will be lost unless we have these kinds of protections.
That I agree with you on that. And to do your story, to do your investigation, to put the information out there, but have to divulge the source when it is a confidential source is something that would be very difficult. I do want to ask you about, you've just been down to Guantanamo Bay.
I have.
And that has kicked back up in the news because
It certainly has.
and we were having a meeting, and they were talking about the raids and conducting the raids, and I had said to the White House person that was there with us, I said, well, why don't we open back up Gitmo? I said, supposedly there are only 15 people there, and they're wanting to close it down. And we've got a lot of bed space that we could use there. And I am really pleased to hear that they're going to send the criminal illegal aliens, many of them gang members, there and hold them there as they process out. But I'd love to hear what you saw and heard while you were in Guantanamo Bay.
Well, the first time I went to Guantanamo Bay was about 17 years ago, and that was the first arraignment for the 5 men in the 9/11 case. And I think most Americans don't realize that there has still not been a trial in the 9/11 prosecution. So there's been no resolution for the nearly 3,000 Americans who were killed and their families. The numbers are much lower now in terms of detainees who are left. As you mentioned, it's only 15. But when you start doing the math, it's about $500 million a year to run the detention camps and then to run the courts. So it's about $30 million a detainee. And I don't know if this is a verb, but after that trip, we said it ought to be doged. Like,
yes.
Right? I mean, this is not government.
I think doge should be a verb.
Yeah, right?
Yeah.
So it's kind of one of these out of sight, out of mind. People had forgotten about it. But when you start to be on the ground and you start doing the math and you see 30 million a detainee, I mean, this makes no sense. And just finally, we found these housing pods that had been built for the 9/11 trial, mostly for the lawyers, for the victims' families, and 156 or something like that. 12 million a pod, 73,000 a pod, really never been used. And we got so many comments on X about North Carolina. People said the government spent all this money on housing at Guantanamo for the terrorist cases, probably will never be used, but we couldn't provide that kind of assistance to people in North Carolina. So the feedback on these platforms is immediate, and I think it's very authentic and sometimes very raw.
And I think people are looking for more immediacy in when they're gathering news. And one of the things I found is that people are drawn to what they're hearing from whistleblowers.
Yes.
And because they want to know what is going on. And as we look at it, people have been so supportive of President Trump going in and closing down agencies or putting a halt to funding so we can find out what is really going on, because they on social media have read some of this that whistleblowers have put out there. And of course, the COVID memo and we've got a new CIA director.
That's right.
John Ratcliffe, and he has made that public. And of course, as people have looked at this, and it's like, why was everybody shunned when they mentioned lab leak theory, when clearly the CIA saw that this had the potential to be accurate?
What I'm seeing on the platforms, at least since I've been doing this independently, is I just have seen a huge uptick of whistleblowers coming forward to me who want to get their story out. They want to be seen, they want to be heard, and they have a lot of confidence that if they can get their information on a platform like X, that things will start to happen, that you can't hide information very easily anymore. The government can't hide information very easily anymore. And I think, for example, with the confirmation hearings for Kash Patel, one of the things that I know from my own reporting experience is that he doesn't generally get a fair shake in the media because his investigations undercut the traditional narrative about Russiagate, undercut the traditional narrative about January 6th. So it in some ways feels a little bit uncomfortable for people, but that's because a lot of information is becoming public that had been hidden in the past.
And transparency is such a good and helpful thing. I think as long as you have that transparency, it can help restore trust.
I think so. As an example, really on X, there was such a discussion about the 60 Minutes interview with Kamala Harris.
Right.
And now we're at the FCC. There's a complaint, and they've released the transcripts and the video. I think it's tremendous that we're having that transparency because people can watch the video for themselves and make up their own minds. I've viewed it. I don't think there's a journalistic foul with the edit, but clearly in the edit room they did Kamala Harris a lot of favors. They cleaned up a lot of the word salad and they made her appear more succinct, more direct, and more presidential. And I think the public can decide whether that crosses a line and amounts to news distortion, that it's not an accurate reflection of her performance in that interview.
And people want authenticity.
Yes.
And if they think that something is opinion or it's been edited, then they don't want to see that. I think there's a real push for that authenticity. I am just so delighted that you are here.
I hope you'll have me back. I enjoyed
it.
Yeah.
And because people are so given, they're tired of opinions. One of the things that has really just struck me with all the hearings we've done is the number of friends that I have that have actually watched the hearings on C-SPAN because they wanted to see for themselves who these individuals are, how they answer the questions, and it speaks to that desire for transparency to know if this is someone that they could trust to carry out the job that they have been nominated for, to fulfill the obligations of that position. So we're delighted there are good investigative journalists like you that are out there working, and to our audience. Thank you for joining us for another Unmuted, and always you'll find me on social media at Marsha Blackburn. And Catherine, thank you ever so much.
Yes, I'll look forward to another time. Feels
Absolutely.
like there's a lot more to say.
Yes, indeed.
Thank you.
Yes, indeed. Thanks.